There are some uses that are conflicting with residential neighborhoods. So one of the things that we determined when we were updating the citywide plan back in 2019 was that we needed to take a closer look at what's going on in the industrial zones. And at the same time, we're just about getting ready to kick off an update of the zoning regulations. So it's a good time to take a look at these. And we have a team on board, UTIL, that's out of Boston, who they're going to introduce themselves in just a minute. And they've been working on this for probably about 6 months now. And they have some, draft recommendations that they want to show you and get your feedback on, and then we'll, reconvene and talk about those things. So the purpose of the study, as I mentioned, is to really look at these areas in the city that have industrial zones. What kind of uses are appropriate? Are the zoning boundaries as they exist correct? Should we adjust those? And how do we use industrial growth in the city for economic benefit, at the same time protecting our waterfront and making it coexist with our other uses in the area? And before I pass it off to Maggie and the team, I just wanted to acknowledge the members of the Oversight Committee that have been working on the study. We have Richard Rowena from the Zoning Commission, Tammy Langalis from the Planning Commission, John Kites and Darlene Young from Common Council. We have myself, Sabrina Church from Economic Development, and Amelia Williams, who works with myself in Planning and Zoning. And with that, I'll turn it over to Maggie from UTIL to introduce her team and take you through the night.
Before we go any further, I'd like to mention that if you need Spanish, English to Spanish interpretation, to click on the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen, or if you're on a phone or iPad, it may be different, but click on the interpretation button and just click Spanish, and you will go into a room with English to Spanish interpretation. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Maggie Sang. I am an urban designer with UTIL. We're architecture and planning firm based out of Boston. With me on my team today, I have Tim Love, who is the principal of UTIL. I've got Will Cohen, who is an urban planner and associate principal. I have Lisa Hollywood, who is also an urban designer like myself. And then I also have Kevin Hively, who is our economic development consultant with Ninigrit Partners. So today, as Steve said, this is a brief schedule of events just because I want to make sure that you guys all know how much time we're going to spend on things. We're going to spend about 5 minutes doing sort of background and market analysis to give some background and context for this study. We'll spend about 25 minutes talking through our draft recommendations. And then we're going to split up into breakout groups and spend about 30 minutes in each breakout group, having a little bit more of an intimate discussion about a couple of the issues that we'll raise in our presentation. And then towards the end, we'll do sort of 15 minutes and loop back around in the main session and do a summary and kind of report back and conclusion. All right. So just to get us started here, this section is going to be a market analysis. And as Steve mentioned, one of the goals of the study was really to examine Norwalk's industrial zones as a key resource for economic development. It's important to sort of clarify what we mean by industrial here, because over the past half century, industry has changed quite a lot. In fact, the Urban Manufacturing Alliance's national report on the state of urban manufacturing highlights how industry has shifted significantly in the 21st century and how the manufacturing sector can be essential to a city's economic growth, employment, as well as placemaking. So our analysis of Fairfield County specifically roughly reflects broader market trends around industrial uses, especially when it comes to the size and scale of industrial businesses. The graph shown here shows the change in number of manufacturing firms from 2012 to 2019 in Fairfield County. And it shows two main things. One is that it shows that firms with over 500 employees have declined by 25%, as you can see in the dark purple line. Whereas the number of small and mid-sized firms, which you can see in the green line, have shown growth. Generally, this reflects a trend that manufacturing firms are actually moving away from large-scale operations and are more likely to be small or mid-sized. In this next analysis, we looked at new employment in manufacturing firms in Fairfield County as sort of a measure of growth. And in 2012, there were about 160 new employees represented by the sort of little dots on the far left bar of this slide. And in 2019, there were about 481. So if we use a standard multiplier of area required for each new employee, which is about roughly 900 square feet per employee, we can actually estimate that Fairfield County has a demand for industrial space that ranges anywhere between 142,000 square feet and 429,000 square feet. And then finally, in sort of a third analysis, we looked at 15 recent industrial real estate transactions that occurred between July and September of last year. All of those 15 transactions were for building spaces less than 50,000 square feet, so sort of representing that sort of small mid-size that I was just mentioning. And then of those 15, 10 of them were actually within the range of 9,000 to 20,000 square feet. So this shows us that the demand for industrial space really tends to be smaller or mid-sized spaces and not really large spaces. But in addition to our sort of market analysis of Fairfield County, excuse me, the city also observed, I've just been talking for like 2 minutes, I have to cough, give me one moment. Sorry. The city has also observed the demand for industrial spaces and has sort of helped us to qualify some of the Norwalk specific trends. So generally in conversation with the city's Office of Business Development and Tourism, we can kind of identify 3 generic types of space that are in demand. So first, on the left side of this slide, you'll see that there's smaller spaces between 5,000 and 10,000 square feet for kind of small boutique manufacturers. And while this size of space exists and is actually available, particularly within Norwalk Central Business District, many of these buildings actually have low ground floor height ceilings, which makes it difficult for boutique manufacturers to use the ground floor space. So while there is availability, there's less viability for the actual users. And second, in the middle of this slide, you can see there's sort of a medium scale space between 10,000 and 25,000 square feet. And the city just has sort of a low stock of this size of space. And finally, there are spaces that are greater than 25,000 square feet or inquiries for spaces that are greater than 25,000 square feet. And here, these users sort of require larger spaces. These users that require larger spaces tend to have sort of larger employment, but again, there's still a low stock of this kind of space. So this kind of just gives you a sense of the industrial space demand within the city of Norwalk. And these inquiries not only range in scale from small, medium, large, but they also range in type. This list here gives you a sense of the different kinds of businesses that are inquiring about industrial space in Norwalk. It really ranges from research and development with some elements of distribution, green energy and infrastructure, including hydroponics and solar related uses, food and beverage manufacturing like granola, ice cream, brewery, distilleries, fabric and textiles, such as printing and high-skilled sewing, and then also biomedical manufacturing, which is actually something that has been requested from a sort of state level. Again, I just want to emphasize that these businesses are ones that qualify as industrial, but actually represent a broader shift in trends and the types of industries that are looking to find space in an urban setting. So it's not big belching factories, but it's more research and development for companies, bakeries, textiles, that sort of thing. So given this context and the market analysis, we've put together 4 draft recommendations that address different areas of concern. These topics and our recommendations are based on feedback from a public survey that we conducted a few months ago. as well as one-on-one interviews with industrial users and businesses, and finally in discussion with the city steering committee, as well as with through reviewing previous city plans and documents. In general, these recommendations look to emphasize and support economic development opportunities while also balancing concerns around abutting uses, traffic and transportation, as well as issues that are around the waterfront. So our first and probably most comprehensive recommendation, so bear with me as I walk through this, is to simplify the city zoning to reflect the needs of 21st century industry. So currently, this is a map of Norwalk. The city has 3 industrial zones. They are Industrial Zone 1, restricted industrial zone, which you see in the light industrial zone 1 here shown in the dark purple, restricted industrial, which is shown in the light purple, and then a very small area that's just called light industrial. But if we look at manufacturing uses more broadly, and this is a use table that shows different districts within the city, manufacturing is actually allowed in 5 additional zoning districts. So there are a total of 8 districts that allow manufacturing of some sort. There's actually quite a lot of manufacturing uses that are allowed in different areas of the city. And so we think that this needs further clarification and simplification to understand sort of the grain of industry that we were just talking about in the previous analysis. So one simple way to kind of clarify these uses is to address the fact that not all industrial uses are the same, and that in order to encourage economic development, we need to distinguish between heavier industrial uses that might be necessary and important for the operation of the city as well as the region, but that don't necessarily need to grow or might not actually be able to grow within the context of the city, and industrial uses that you want to encourage and incentivize because they promote opportunities for economic development, job growth, and also placemaking. And so these are more along the lines of light industry and boutique manufacturing, which you can see sort of a selection of different types of uses under each of these categories on this gradient. So you can have, on the one hand, on the heavy industry side, you have concrete plants and oil storage, which are actually like family owned and pretty prominent businesses within the city, but that maybe represent industries that are not necessarily going to grow in the city. Whereas you also have a wide range of light industrial uses like oyster farming and research and development, food and beverage manufacturing. And then you also on the smallest scale have boutique and artisan manufacturing like ceramic studios and bakeries. So these 3 categories of industrial use are actually quite different from one another and can be used to sort of reclassify and simplify the existing zoning. So this is the sort of use table that I showed before, and sort of categorization into 3 different industrial categories. And so this is a kind of a proposed zoning chart that we're showing. So rather than have 8 different zones that are each slightly different from one another, we are recommending 3 simplified.
Recomendando 3 zonas simplificadas, que dice 3 categorías. Primero, industrial 1, que está preservado,
and then second, there is a mixed-use commercial industrial district that would allow a mix of light manufacturing, warehousing, and other industrial services, as well as commercial uses. And then finally, there is a mixed-use residential commercial industrial district that allows a mix of boutique manufacturing, residential uses, and other commercial establishments. So a key aspect of this that you'll notice in this chart is that in that industrial mixed use in commercial industrial districts, multifamily residential uses are not allowed. And this is to prevent these areas of the city that are well suited for mixed commercial industrial use from being developed as housing, and to preserve the spaces where industrial uses can, or sort of light manufacturing, light industrial uses can go. And finally, we'll go over this later in the presentation, but these zones sort of will include an overlay for marine and water dependent uses along the waterfront, which are going to ultimately be determined by a more specific and tailored waterfront plan. So again, here's the map of the city with the 8 districts where manufacturing is allowed. And here's sort of the simplified version where there are just 3 districts that are shown in pink, light purple, and then dark purple. So ultimately, the goal of simplifying the zoning is to update the zoning code to reflect 21st century industrial trends. And sort of encourage light and boutique manufacturing where they make sense to be located, to designate an appropriate mix of residential and commercial uses with industrial uses in certain areas, and then ultimately to create simpler and easier rules to understand instead of having sort of more complicated, very long zoning regulations that a lot of the times have sort of inconsistencies or repetition. So I'm going to walk you through the two new industrial districts that we just discussed that while the industrial zone 1 is preserved, there's two new districts that we're introducing. The first is the mixed use residential commercial industrial district, which consolidates the intentions of the central business district and the neighborhood business district. In this zone, industrial uses are limited to boutique manufacturing uses. So this means sewing and textile, things like sewing and textile production, bakeries, ceramics, artist live workspaces. And this is the intent of this district is that these boutique manufacturing ground floor uses will contribute to a sort of a mixed use neighborhood, a sense of place, and sort of the urban fabric more generally. As I showed in the map before, the zone occupies the space of the central core of the city, shown here in pink, and might have potential locations in the central business district along West Avenue, for example, in Sono along the northern end of South Main Street, as well as in the East Norwalk TOD area. And obviously this builds on policy goals that have been put forth by the city's neighborhood plans, including the Wall Street West Avenue plan and the East Norwalk TOD plan. And so just taking a closer look at the central business district, our recommendation here is to sort of remove the I-1 zone designation at the Cross Street and Knight Street areas, and to maintain the waterfront I-1 zone, and then ultimately to sort of change the rest to that mixed use residential, commercial, industrial zone that allows for boutique manufacturing. These are sort of, propositions that have already been kind of expressed through the West and Wall Street neighborhood plan. And so we're just sort of building off of some of those ideas. If we look at the East Norwalk TOD area, our recommendation is to remove the I-1 zoning in the areas adjacent to the rail lines while maintaining the I-1 zone only on the WPCA site, and to change these zones here, where it says change I-1 zoning, to the mixed use residential, commercial, industrial, where boutique manufacturing is allowed. Again, trying to contribute to this mixed use kind of neighborhood where boutique manufacturing might happen on the ground floor, and then there might be residential or commercial above. So one of the key aspects of this zoning change for the mixed use residential, commercial, industrial district will be to adjust building heights to accommodate for ground floor boutique manufacturing and retail uses. Currently, the zoning restricts height to 4 stories and 50 feet maximum in the East Norwalk district, and then 4 stories at 55 feet maximum at the Central Business District. These height restrictions sort of limit the height of ground floors and prevent the possibility of sort of taller ground floors that can actually accommodate boutique manufacturers as well as mixed use commercial buildings. As you can see on, this is kind of in the nitty gritty, but as you can see on the left, building to 4 stories only allows a 17-foot, building to 4 stories with residential on top only allows a 17-foot ground floor, which is actually too low for a lot of boutique manufacturing uses. And then building commercial over retail or boutique manufacturing really only allows for 3 stories or 2 additional stories of commercial use on top of a ground floor because of the height restriction that there is. Our recommendation is to maintain the 4-story height limit, but to allow some flexibility in the maximum overall height. So you can, in this way, you can allow for ground floors to be the appropriate height for both boutique manufacturing and ground floor retail, while also accommodating 3 floors of either residential or commercial use. So here you can see that the ground floor is allowed to be sort of a 20 to 24 foot range for boutique manufacturing and still accommodate 3 floors of residential or 3 floors of commercial on top. So the takeaways for this zone is really that the ground floor heights can accommodate this sort of flexibility of boutique manufacturing and retail, especially where retail might not be viable on the ground floor. Boutique manufacturing can fill in. And it's also meant to sort of encourage and support those mixed use neighborhoods that have opportunity for job growth and also increase economic development. Okay, the second district is the mixed-use commercial industrial district, which consolidates the districts sort of in this wide range of commercial and light manufacturing districts that the city already has. So in this zone, industrial uses are limited to light industrial and light manufacturing uses, as well as research and development, warehousing, and industrial services. This zone kind of occupies the space shown in light purple here. These areas are already well connected to transportation corridors and overlap with some of the city's existing industrial zones. And this might include areas such as the Muller Industrial Park, the Perry Avenue area, MLK Drive, as well as the Wilson Avenue, Woodward Avenue area of SoNo. So what distinguishes this district from typical industrial zones is that it integrates commercial upper floors with ground floor, commercial upper floor uses with ground floor, high bay industrial uses. This is an image of a prototypical mixed use commercial industrial building where the ground floor can actually be a 30-foot to 40-foot high bay space that can support industrial uses, but also can structurally support 3 to 4 upper floors of commercial use, such as office space or showrooms. And this building type is one that can be seen in other cities, such as the Marine Industrial Park in Boston, the Brooklyn Navy Yard, or the New York building in Portland. And generally, it's a building type that we think will work well in the context of Norwalk. We've tested this type with the city's parking and zoning regulations in mind, and there are a range of options that are available to the city that are mostly dictated by the amount of parking that's required by the city for any given building area. So as we say a lot, the parking is the tail that wags the dog. And so you can see, for example, that at a minimum with 2 floors with industrial use on the ground floor and a commercial upper floor can fit on roughly 2 acres given parking requirements. And then on the right-hand side of the slide, you can fit up to 4 stories with 1 floor of industrial ground floor use and 3 stories of commercial use on a roughly 3 acres. So this is just to show that there's sort of a flexibility within this building prototype, but there's also kind of a minimum size of parcel that this can work on. So the takeaways here are that ultimately the goal of this district is to allow commercial upper floor space to cross-subsidize ground floor industrial space. By allowing more height and density, this kind of incentivizes redevelopment of these areas and adds to the city's commercial tax base. And it also encourages sort of desirable industrial uses such as light manufacturing and research and development, as well as life science labs. Okay, you survived that first part of the presentation, which I'm very proud of you for doing. This is the second recommendation, which is maybe actually shockingly short, which is to require a special development proposal for Norden Place that considers sort of more pertinent issues relative to Norden Place, such as residential areas and circulation. This is a recommendation specifically for Norden Place because it's such an outlier in the city. In our analysis of Norden Place, there are some specific factors that make it so unique, namely that it's one of the largest sites in the city at around 37 acres, and that it is surrounded by residential areas here shown in yellow. And while it's adjacent to I-95, it doesn't actually have easy or efficient access to the highway because trucks traveling to and from the site are actually required to follow this red line or red arrow path to get to I-95, and that's through residential areas. So our key takeaways for this particular recommendation is that in developing Norden Place, there are a few important parameters to consider for a special development plan. First, that because the parcel is around 37 acres, it presents a unique opportunity for a mixed commercial industrial user that can add to the commercial tax base of the city, create jobs, and revitalize sort of an economic engine of the city rather than develop multifamily housing. So second, given that potential land use, potential users will need to consider access to I-95 and abutting residential uses. This might include restricting vehicular traffic to passenger vehicles and small trucks only, or it might include a larger study of additional ramps or access points directly onto I-95 in compliance with CONDOT. And ultimately, the development should be sensitive to the abutting residential uses. So, just as and first thinking about some of these parameters, this might suggest something like research and development, life science, or even biotech users. Our third draft recommendation has to do with contractor yards and other uses that often occur within Norwalk's existing industrial zones, such as self-storage. Currently, contractor yards are permitted by right in the I-1 zone, where I know there's also a moratorium, but this primarily affects areas in South Norwalk as well as East Norwalk. So I just wanted to take a moment to kind of address some of the conflicts and challenges that arise with contractor yards, which mostly have to do with the intermingling of industrial uses and residential uses. So as you can see on this map of South Norwalk, industrial uses shown in industrial zones shown in purple are mixed with pockets of residential uses, both single family and multifamily. Second, the streets in this area, with the exception of MLK Drive, are very narrow because they're residential streets and are not well suited for large truck traffic or semis and dump trucks kind of driving up and down. And third, the street network in this area, not in addition to being very narrow, is actually very irregular because of its situation and its adjacency to sort of wetlands and the way that it was developed historically, which leads to sort of awkward and narrow, tight intersections and other sorts of traffic conflicts. It's also important to acknowledge that not all contractor yards are the same in this context. There are some contractor uses that have a greater impact on their surroundings than others. For example, considered within sort of the heavy industry side here, you can see that storage yards for earth, sand, and gravel are more intensive and also visible. Whereas plumbers and electricians may have less of an impact on their immediate surroundings. So again, while some of these contractor yards can be necessary for the region for the operation of the city, some of them are not well located. So our recommendation is twofold. One is to consider alternative locations for contractor yards where the impacts of their operations will have less of an impact. In doing so, we can alleviate the burden of certain residential areas from housing the majority of contractor yards and provide better alternatives with fewer sort of explicit impacts and conflicts. Areas to study for this relocation or alternative location might include the Muller Industrial Park or MLK Drive. And then the second part of our recommendation is to sort of enforce existing codes and regulations to ensure that contractor yards are in compliance. So this could be just enforcing existing codes, but it could also include providing additional design guidelines that'll assist in buffering and the impacts of buffering the impacts of contractor yards on adjacent properties, such as landscaping buffers, fencing, reassessing sort of maximum storage pile heights, that type of thing. And just kind of as a last note in this general recommendation, we wanted to sort of address self-storage. In conversation with the city, self-storage is really not the highest and best use for industrial land. As you can see by this picture, sort of a typical self-storage area, it really provides limited jobs and opportunities for economic development, and also is very obviously not contributing to an active ground floor use or to the public realm. So part of this recommendation is also to sort of disallow self-storage. So again, the takeaways here, allowing contractor yards in selected additional locations in the city where the impacts are lower on surrounding residential areas, enforce current regulations and codes, consider additional design guidelines, including landscaping buffers, fencing design, and maximum pile heights, and disallowing self-storage. Okay, so the final draft recommendation we have here is to develop a separate waterfront plan that looks at the Norwalk River. Waterfront is a unique area with a diversity of uses, regulations, and other sorts of pressures and issues. The waterfront hosts a diversity of uses, including housing, commercial uses, retail, marinas, boat storage, water-dependent industrial uses, recreational uses, and as well as public access. So there's lots of considerations here. You can see, but just by looking at this map, sort of the complexity of not only the different types of zoning districts that are there, but also the different types of uses and sort of environmental factors such as flood vulnerability and sea level rise. So our recommendation is to sort of update the harbor management plan from 2009 to reflect the future vision of the Norwalk River as a whole. And second, to sort of promote public waterfront access. You can see here in the green line showing the sort of public walk along the river. This is something that we want to maintain as we go through, maintain and encourage and build upon as we go through the waterfront plan. And this is something that we're working on with the city to study further and to sort of develop this plan more explicitly. And so that will come back and feed into the previous zoning recommendations as well. So finally, just some key takeaways from this section as well is to sort of study, map, and analyze the diversity of uses and requirements along the waterfront and to sort of reconcile the conflicts with the inclusive planning initiative, to maintain and encourage public access along the waterfront, and also to clarify the difference between water-dependent uses and uses that benefit from the proximity to the water because of views or public access. Okay, with that, presentation over. Thank you for being patient and listening. We're going to do some breakout groups now. And in these breakout groups, our hope is that we can just, have a moment to speak with a smaller group of you about some of the issues that we've gone over here. We'll be addressing two topics. You'll be with a facilitator from UTIL. The first topic will be industrial uses in Norwalk, and then the second topic will be Norwalk's waterfront. We'll give 30 minutes to kind of go through these two different topics, and then we'll group back together and give a summary and sort of additional comments and close out the meeting. So with that, I also wanted to mention, I guess, Larry, would you just walk people through the details of the Spanish translation at this point?
Yes. In a moment, we're going to go into the breakout rooms. I'm going to assign people. There are going to be 5 separate breakout rooms. If you need English to Spanish translation, please raise your hand now electronically. And I will put you in breakout room number 1, which will have a Spanish translator. Is there anyone that needs translation? Raise your hand electronically now. I'm going to start opening all the rooms. And if all of our hosts can go into the rooms.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. I'm back in the English side.
Okay, I don't think we need a translator for the breakout room.
No one has said so. Okay.
Right, so you could just stay in here.
Excellent.
Looks like everyone's migrating in slowly, so if you haven't moved into a room, you'll be in there.
It's going to take me a while to get everyone in their breakout rooms.
He's about half done, so we're almost there.
I think I put the other interpreter in one of the breakout rooms, but that's okay. John Pinto, let's see where. I don't see.
Oh, I see. Let's see. I think breakout room 3.
Yeah, you need to go to breakout room 3.
Is that dealing with Waterfront? Or is it just
They're all going to be dealing with similar topics.
I got you.
Yep, go to breakout room 3. Thank you.
You sent it. You sent.
What was her name?
Nancy. She's in room 5. She just told me.
I'm going to take her out. She doesn't need to be in there. Where is she?
She's in room 5.
Oh, she needs to come out, but I can't take her out. That's all right. She could stay in there.
She won't be interpreting though, right?
No, she doesn't need to.
I'll text her.
Yeah, text her. She doesn't need to interpret. No one. Lou Shulman, can you hear me? I see you. I see a few people here that are if you haven't joined your breakout room, there's a click where you can click and join your breakout room. Hi, Maggie.
Hi, Larry. There was something weird with my room where I only had a few people in my room, but they were all joined by phone and I could not hear any of them or none of them were speaking.
Because I picked the top people and you can't hear any of them because they can't, they probably can't unmute.
Yes, and I noticed that might be a problem that they couldn't unmute. Is there a way to either move them to another breakout room right now so they have an opportunity? It's not important that I
allow participants to unmute themselves. I just clicked that. I don't know if that's, you can try it now.
Okay, let me see if I can join.
So they couldn't speak during your presentation.
I see. So let me join them again and see if they're able to talk with me. If not, I'll just rejoin this room again. work and helping us to get into those breakout rooms and taking us back to the main room. So maybe, I guess we had 5 rooms. I'll just go around the circle and we'll just spend a minute, a sentence per facilitator, just to sort of summarize the discussion that you all had. Maybe I'll go first, which is just to say I had a small group, but I think in our discussion about boutique manufacturing versus light manufacturing uses, as well as just industrial uses more broadly in Norwalk, there was actually some excitement about seeing industrial uses like marine-based uses, and especially in the sort of East Norwalk area, and some reverence for the history of industrial uses in Norwalk as well, from like hat making to even some of the electronics that Norden Place used to generate. So I think there was some excitement about returning to some of that manufacturing, but I think also some concerns about regulating and monitoring those businesses for noise or fumes or other sorts of disturbances that might occur for abutting uses or neighbors. So I think that there's some sort of sensitivity to, or sort of a balance between allowing manufacturing uses and then sort of regulating them. And then also an acknowledgement of boutique manufacturing uses being appropriate for some areas, whereas light manufacturing uses might be appropriate for other areas where there's maybe not a mix of retail and sort of residential uses. And then when it came to the waterfront, I think the most significant thing that was mentioned was just sort of the lack of identity that the waterfront has. That one person in my breakout group shared that, you know, they lived in the city for about 3 years without knowing really that the waterfront was such an amenity or such a place, and so that there might be a desire to sort of express or build on the identity of the waterfront. So maybe I'll pass it to Will.
Yeah, thanks. So to not be too repetitive, I think we covered some very similar topics. I think for the first question, one main point was that, you know, the distinction between should we be focusing on light industrial versus boutique feels like a bit of a straw man. That obviously the answer should be some version of both. And it's really just a matter of trying to find a balance for both, because they each do important things for the economy, right? The sort of what we see as boutique manufacturing helps create, you know, that sense of, for lack of a better term,
la sensación de una buena parte esencial de que una buena parte de
is an important part of job creation, which also is absolutely important to Norwalk. There were concerns also about height, that the sort of increased heights, especially with the simplified zones, might uncork the bottle a bit too much, especially with sort of abutting uses in residential. And so just some more sensitivity to that, between making what we want to see happen versus not wholesale changing the character of the place is an important balance to strike. For the waterfront, I think it was mostly, it was like what you said, Maggie, but also that it as an asset is underutilized, not just not known about, right? And so whether it's trying to sort of make oysters be more front and center, actually trying to create a sense of a place that is worth making it more of a tourist destination, and or, you know, increasing access in the way that, you know, one of the slides was talking about. Taking advantage of that to accomplish the means at the end is like an active decision that the city needs to be working on. And the second half to that is that there's a lot of expression of the need to take care in doing it, because the effects of what changes on the waterfront will be felt by the city for a long time. And so there is a bit of the sentiment of measure twice, cut once.
Great, maybe I'll pass it to Tim then.
Yeah, I to not be repetitive, I think there was support for the range of, you know, from light industrial to boutique manufacturing that my group called makers in the group. But there was a very good point raised that those boundaries, that boundary between light industrial and boutique manufacturing has to be very carefully considered and not be too slippery, because if boutique manufacturing is allowed where there's also residential, then the rules for what that counts as has to be very clear, and we have to be clear to the city that they can't open the barn door for other uses to be counted in that. So people liked it as long as the boundaries were very clear. And I think it was mostly around how much truck traffic and how much noise is there going to be. I think the other thing too was one other piece about that is to make sure when those things happen that they're successful, because there were some examples, and I'll have to talk to the city staff about this, about some boutique manufacturing that's been less successful in the city. And so we need to find out more about that. And I have long notes about what that might be. On the waterfront, everybody said that the waterfront is an incredible resource. But we also had John Pinto from the Norwalk Harbor Management Commission, who basically was telling me how the world worked, and I was taking furious notes, and we all were. So we were very lucky to have John there to explain to us that it's all about the health of the shellfish. And so all pollutants end up in seafood. And so that was a really a very kind of concise story he told that I really appreciated. But the general story is that everybody cherishes the waterfront, and we should be very careful as we plan it, that we measure twice and cut once, to pick up on what Will said. So that's it.
Great. Lisa?
Great, yeah. So a lot of really knowledgeable people in my group, and definitely won't be able to touch on all the points that were raised. In terms of the manufacturing uses, you know, everyone was really supportive of the boutique manufacturing uses. And there was an idea that they could be particularly well suited for South Norwalk, and potentially converting some of the existing contractor yards that are not well positioned according to residential areas into kind of boutique manufacturing areas. There were some kind of details that were pointed out when it comes to boutique manufacturing, thinking about the types of products that are produced and the effect of that on transportation and kind of truck traffic and that kind of thing. Also thinking about promoting clean industry across both boutique manufacturing and light industrial as well as a lot of comments about enforcement. And, you know, it's really great that we're kind of talking about enforcement, but we need to really kind of focus in on that. And then in terms of the waterfront discussion, there was mention of kind of wanting to promote the kind of mom and pop aquaculture uses that are existing in the waterfront, but also concerns about water quality and the fact that the upper river has a grade F, and then the kind of mention of a lot of legacy industrial sites along the river and kind of the environmental implications of that as well.
Great, thank you, Lisa.
Kevin.
Yeah, Kevin, you're the last one.
Great. So on regards to question number one, a lot of support for boutique manufacturing, particularly what I would categorize as kind of consumer product oriented manufacturing. So things like brew pubs, breweries, bakeries, sewing, etc. On the light manufacturing side, there was a comment that I thought was really well said, which is light manufacturing, you know, makes some sense if it's properly placed, which I think is fitting with a lot of the commentary. With regards to the waterfront, there was this idea of personal access, which is walking, biking, kayaking, and making sure that that has kind of equal footing with kind of marine user access. So the boating and the heavy industry users. A commentary around views, view corridors, view sheds, and what that means, but not necessarily height, but making sure that the riverfront is not a castle, if you will, that you can't see into. Another comment, a lot of commentary around activation. So everything, particularly, you know, from the access, but to dining and other types of uses, particularly for all of Norwalk and the role of the park and potential activities at the park. And then the last key point is not excluding the fact that the riverfront and the waterfront of Norwalk is kind of key from a connectivity point of view to the islands, the beaches, rail, and the comment about Manresa Island and what happens there in particular. And so with that, I think that I captured that pretty well, team. We were high achievers. We were done early and we all got in here really quickly.
Great. Thank you, Kevin, for that report back of your group. I think that with that, we've covered all of the breakout groups, and it seems like there have been some really robust conversations, which is amazing. And I'm going to maybe pass it off to Steve now to wrap up with any final questions or comments from attendees that are still here and who have lasted this long, which is great. And then I'm actually also going to, he said I could do this, so I'm going to throw up this slide with his email address on it, so in case there are other questions.
Sure, yeah, and that is a correct email. I didn't give you a false one, so I would lighten up my inbox a little bit. Yeah, so we do have a little bit of time. We don't have a ton of time because I know everybody is already committed an hour and a half, but if anybody had some burning questions or burning points, we'll take some comments on those just to kind of give you an idea of next steps. So as you know, Maggie stated numerous times, this is just kind of the initial draft thoughts. So we're, the kind of the point of the breakout rooms was to get a little more intimate feedback from everybody. So Maggie and her team will get together and coalesce those comments. The idea and what we're hoping happens, what we think will happen is, sorry, that's my dog who is, of course, she's barking right in the middle of the meeting. We'll take those comments. Sorry about that.
The dog has feelings about industrial zones too.
Right.
Sorry about that. It's always somebody, and it's usually never me, but at this time it was me. So what they'll do is the breakout rooms, hopefully those were all recorded, and with all the city Zoom meetings, we'll get those up on the city page. And so you can see the actual give and take and conversation within the different breakout rooms. Maggie and her team will get together, coalesce all the thoughts, and the oversight committee that's been looking at this in depth will get together and then decide which direction to go with some of the recommendations. And then, we'll coalesce those, and then we'll have another public meeting down the road, hopefully not too long, where we kind of say, okay, here's what we heard, here's our final recommendations, and then, prepare the final report. With that, if there's anybody who wants to speak, I saw somebody with a raised hand. If anybody does want to speak, now would be the time to do so. And please, if you could keep it, as brief as possible, that would be appreciated.
All right, we have one person, Diane Laricella. Diane, I don't know if you can unmute, or I have to allow you to. One moment. Okay. All right, try it now, Diane.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Stephen and UTL and the participants. This was a great conversation. I just had one quick question for Steve. Because of the expected infrastructure monies from the federal government, not all of them will happen in months, but is it important for some discussions or decisions to be made so we have what they call shovel-ready projects? I don't know what the timing is for when we should have some what they call shovel-ready projects ready, and are any of these going to help qualify for the infrastructure monies?
That's actually an excellent question. One of my staff was on a seminar today going over some of the different programs that are coming available. I think it's a really good question. I don't know if I have a firm answer for you at this point, but it's something that's going to be on our definite short-term radar, and I'll I'll bring it up with the rest of the economic development staff too. And then I think we can start getting coalesced around that. But I'm thankful that you said that so we could start thinking about that a little more. I think John Pinto has his hand raised too.
Yes, John, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, you unmuted and muted really quickly again. So I think you got to just, there you go.
I'm just curious, Steve, I'm just curious about the comment about updating the harbor management plan. The Harbor Commission already does that. And I'm just wondering, was that going to be assistance from your staff or how is that going to happen?
So excuse me, I'm echoing a little bit. Initially, we wanted to take a look at the harbor as part of this study in depth, but as the UTL team and everyone was getting into it, we realized that it was just too big of an apple to bite into at this point. So we're looking at getting some additional funds to transfer into this project so we can look at that more closely. And with that, I think we definitely want to have some folks from harbor management participate in that, as well as a few other folks as well.
All right, no, Steve, because as I said, the harbor management plan is quite comprehensive as it stands right now. As you know, we tried to have this as part of an addendum to the city's plan itself, the city's plan that it put together. The question I have is that our harbor management plan is state approved. It has to go through the DEP as well as city and common council approved. So as I said, we have a living document as far as I'm concerned right now that we work by, and as I said, it's in the process of being tweaked to perhaps even add some of the comments with regard to your industrial zone study.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we'll do is when the second phase of the study gets going is going to focus on those land uses in and around the harbor, and be cognizant of all the points that were raised here tonight, whether that's the water dependent use, maintaining the active marinas, maintaining as much of the industry as possible, while also meeting the demands of folks that want to get access to the water, and then probably first and foremost, making sure that whatever is proposed or done in the future emphasizes the importance of water quality and making sure that we don't do things that degrade that. Okay, and I think Diane Cece, sorry, has her hand raised too.
Yes, Diane, you can unmute. Thank you.
Thank you. East Norwalk Neighborhood Association. So a couple of things. I think I think next week, Steve, there's a public hearing that you address the expiring or already expired industrial use moratorium that was in place for the past year on specific uses. And I'm not quite sure if you had the timeline of this particular project outlined here, how far this is going out, but I wonder why we're not having the discussion of having a moratorium on all industrial use applications, if not all of them, certainly all special permit applications while we're going through this process. Not only the industrial zone study recommendations, but also the zoning regulation studies that you're just about to start. Why don't we take a look at prohibiting special permit applications? And then the second question is, the deck that we're seeing tonight in the presentation in some areas seems to be fairly significantly different than the draft recommendations that some of the people in the public saw from March. And I'd mentioned in the breakout that I didn't think there were any other committee meetings between your March meeting and what we're seeing tonight. So this is the first time that we're seeing some of this, and I hope there's an opportunity for stakeholder groups to digest this and go back to our own groups and come back and ask some questions, make some suggestions, or share some concerns. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll address the first one. So yeah, the zoning commission they have a public hearing next Thursday on extending the moratorium. It's for another 12-month period. And I think that would be more than enough time to implement changes that come out of this plan. We did talk about adding a couple uses to the moratorium at the last commission meeting. And, you know, I believe the chairman is on the meeting, and I think a couple of the members as well. So I think, you know, if that's deemed appropriate, we would. I don't know if I would go as far to say all special permit uses or make it that broad or that much of a blanket. But, you know, if there are some that have been, you know, more concerning than others. I'd have to go back and look at the March meeting to see what changed. I know some things got refined just based on, you know, that there were a couple items in there that when things got taken a closer look at, saying, you know, this makes more sense and this doesn't make sense. And there were a few concepts that, you know, we discussed at the committee level that once, you know, we vetted them a little further, said, you know, it was probably not something we want to include going forward. Maggie, you could probably take this share down if that's okay.
Oh yeah, sure. I was going to say that if there are any other comments, we'll take them, but otherwise it seems like there's no one else who's raised their hand. So this might be a good point to stop, and that if there are other additional comments or questions, that you can feel free to reach out to Steve, and we will also discuss as a larger group. And obviously we'll be meeting internally to review all of the feedback and sort of the robust discussion that was had tonight. So it's 8:08, which is like a lucky number. So maybe that's a good time to end the meeting and have everybody, you know, have a good rest of your nights.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming
everybody.
out and participating.
Thanks so much, everybody. It was a really good conversation.
Thank you to everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Larry.
And to my facilitators, don't forget to save your recording.